everyone, today's lesson is over Geoffrey Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. Now, who is Geoff Chaucer? Well, he is the author of the poem The Canterbury Tales, where he famously captures and satirizes life in the Middle Ages. First, before we go on, you need to write your essential question in the essential question box. Why did Chaucer write the Canterbury Tales? So first, let's find out a little bit about Geoff. He lived during the 14th century, which was an age of transition between the Dark Ages and Renaissance, and he lived in the 1300s and Middle Ages. He was the son of a wine merchant. He was born in 1340. He was educated. Many were not at this time. In fact, most could not even read. He served as administration to royal households. He often traveled for the crown to France and Italy, so he most likely actually was able to speak and read and write in those languages as well, as most people who had a classical education at the time, which were very few. He held a variety of jobs, witnessed the economic, political, and social changes in England. Chaucer's work. So Chaucer's work experience and travels afforded him with the ability to see people from all levels of society, from the paupers in the street to kings and queens. This is actually especially seen in Canterbury Tales. This exposure allows him to write characters who represent the lower, middle, and upper classes. This in itself is unique. No longer does literature only present the lives of kings and warriors. Now we're seeing everyday people, people like you and me. Middle English. The Canterbury Tales was written in Middle English, the primary language spoken by the population. In part due to Canterbury Tales' popularity, Middle English becomes primary language for the royal court and upper class as well. Chaucer now is called the father of the English language because of this. And we're going to actually look at the difference. I'm going to show you Canterbury Tales written in Middle English, and we are going to read, though, what is written in modern English. So what was the Middle Ages like? Well, there was famine. Black Death was rampant, which is the bubonic plague. And, the reason we had that was because a pope decided that black cats were evil, and so all the black cats were killed, and there weren't enough of other cats, and, well, the rat population got out of hand and bit people, and there you go. The fleas and all that, it was unclean at the time. The water was unclean. They did not bathe. There was bad hygiene. They weren't brushing their teeth every day. They did not have these capabilities. And you might get to live to 30. So, guys, most of you right now are middle age. So, another thing they did was healing with cups and leeches. Now, I was going to show you a picture of the cups, of cupping. But it's really disturbing. And actually, people do it today. It looks painful and scarring personally, but I don't know. They do it. But they also would believe that people were sick because they had bad blood. So they would set leeches on them to get the bad blood out. Chaucer's Tales. Okay, he tells the larger tale of the journey of pilgrims to Canterbury Cathedral. This is what they're all doing. They're all going on this pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. The storytellers are a group of strangers traveling together. There was safety in numbers, and they were going to a religious festival. Guys, we think, what would have happened? Well, it wasn't like there were, a lot of people going through. So if you were by yourself going somewhere, you could have been attacked by thieves and highwaymen and things like that. So this involves storytelling by individuals to pass the time who range from a nun, a knight, a cook, a monk, and a merchant. We are going to read the Wife of Bath's tale. We're also going to read the prologue, which is very short, once it's been condensed to modern English. So the premise of this is Chaucer uses a pilgrimage, a religious journey, as a way for 29 characters to share their story. Leaving from the Tabard Inn, which is actually a real place below, the pilgrims are instructed to tell 2 tales on the way to Canterbury Cathedral and 2 on the return journey. The best tale will be rewarded by the inn owner and host of the journey. The pilgrimages were popular in the period. They showed your devotion, and they believed they had healing properties. Archbishop Thomas Becket was murdered inside Canterbury Cathedral in 1170 when he disagreed with King Henry II over church rights and privileges. And at this point he has made a saint, so they are going on the pilgrimage to recognize him. The church canonized him within 3 years of the murder. Most popular pilgrimage site in England in the 1300s was going actually to Canterbury Cathedral to see Archbishop. And from what I understand, it's actually today, not to see him, but to recognize him. There we have a stained glass depicting 2 knights of King Henry stabbing Archbishop Thomas Becket. So what is the structure of the Canterbury Tales? Okay, so there's 3 parts. There's a general prologue, which we will read. The characters each have a prologue. They kind of set up their story. And then the characters' tales. While we are only going to read the general prologue and the Wife of Bath tale, I am going to go over the Wife of Bath prologue with you. She does have some interesting and important things to say, but I don't think it's necessary to read the whole thing. The general prologue. So Chaucer's poem begins with an introduction of all the pilgrims, the host, and Chaucer, who adds himself as a fictional narrative. And in our copy, they're going to call him Geoffrey, Each person is particularly identified by profession and appearance. There is also implied moral judgment. The general prologue also sets up the journey and frames the character's individual story. So our literary characteristics of the Canterbury Tales. First, we have the frame story, which we just mentioned. It's a literary device in which a smaller story is told within the context of the tale. So we have our general prologue. We have our general prologue that begins it, and it sets up the story, and it's Geoffrey talking about how he goes to this inn, and he meets all these people, and he asks if it's okay if he travels with them to this festival, so they go. And the end, the last part of the frame, is after everyone's told their stories, and they're ending the story and who wins the competition. So Chaucer's telling the story of the pilgrims. Within that, smaller tales are told. Another thing is the heroic couplet. Now these are 2 paired lines of poetry written in iambic pentameter, and that's meter. The pair or couplet must rhyme. Guys, everyone gives Shakespeare credit for this, but this was actually introduced by Chaucer in the Middle Ages, not during the Renaissance. So an example of this is, you're off to Canterbury. Well, Godspeed. Blessed St. Thomas, answer to your need. So we rhyme speed and need. That is our couplet. Another thing that we have in this is satire. When an author ridicules and exposes the fault of his or her subject, and this is used in order to provoke change a lot of times. We find satire funny. We're going to read some satire this year. Another piece coming up called The Modest Proposal, but that's more in the 1800s. but we're going to see a lot of satire. And we're going to find it, some of us will find it funny, some of us won't. The Canterbury Tales is a very important satire, pointing out the need for change in medieval beliefs and practices. Now, two tools Chaucer uses to create satire are verbal irony and physiognomy. Now, we may ask ourselves, what is verbal irony and physiognomy? I'm going to tell you. So, verbal irony is when there is a meaningful contrast between what is said and what is actually meant. So, example, if you said, the best monk, when really the monk does not really adhere to the ideals of monastic life. So, if you're calling someone the best monk and he's not very monastic, that would be verbal irony. Physiognomy. Okay, so this is the use of physical appearance to suggest attributes of a person's character or personality. And literature does this often, and so does cartoons. So if we think of the evil stepmother figures in Disney movies, how do they look? Well, they always have harsh, angular appearances, which always kind of hints to a malevolent motive and someone who's up to no good. Think about how they always have sharp chins, high, sharp cheekbones, things like that. Now, Chaucer's prologue and tales. Chaucer meant for each character to share 4 tales in total, but died before he could achieve this. Before each tale, Chaucer includes a prologue or introduction of the person who will tell the tale. Each has a short introduction in the general prologue, but here he or she is more fully developed. Now, we have the narrator's observation, and then the character's words, actions, and interactions. Now, this follows with shared tale told to the whole group of travelers. Now, the types of tales. So we have a couple of types. We have the allegory. Now, an allegory is a story with the purpose of teaching a moral lesson. Characters and events represent abstract qualities or ideas. The writer intends a secondary meaning. So characters are often personifications of abstractions like greed or envy. So remember, allegory is teaching a moral. Now, example of this is the Pardoner's Tale. Like I said, we're not going to read it, but you will need to know what an allegory is. Another type is romance. Now, a romance story isn't necessarily two people running across the field to each other and falling in love. We do see a little love in this, but we don't see a lot. So a romance is a story focusing on the episodic adventures of knights and the challenges they face. That was originally what a romance was. So our example is going to be the Wife of Bath tale. Hers is definitely considered a romance. So here are some examples of modern lines written in Middle English. Do you recognize them? Do a little dance, make a little love, getty thee down, thy's night. Product idea. Green Knight bobblehead, the knight can be removed. The head can be removed. Now, we're not going to read Sir Gawain the Green Knight, but he was one of the knights of the Round Table, and there is a story about him where he is in trouble. What do literary poets have for lunch? They have a Caesura salad. I know, these are really bad, aren't they? I'll let you read the rest if you want.